This is the video on synaptic anatomy. The synapse basically consists of three components. The first component is the presynaptic membrane. It is the membrane of the axon terminal where the message is converted from an electrical signal to a chemical signal. The second component is the postsynaptic membrane. This is the membrane of the cell that is receiving the signal. It can be a dendrite, axodendritic, a cell body or soma, axosomatic, or another axon, axoaxonic. This membrane must have receptors for the neurotransmitter being released from the presynaptic membrane, otherwise the signal will not be passed forward. The third component is the synaptic cleft. This is simply the gap between the presynaptic membrane and the postsynaptic membrane. This gap is often filled with enzymes for breaking down the neurotransmitter, like acetylcholinesterase. The presynaptic membrane is where the vesicles attach with the snare mechanism and dock, waiting to release the neurotransmitter. Also near the presynaptic membrane are the voltage-gated calcium channels. These open when the electrical signal from the action potential depolarizes the channel. Calcium moves into the axon terminal and attaches to the snare mechanism. Once attached, the snare will pull the vesicle toward the membrane so the vesicle and membrane fuse, opening a pore for the neurotransmitter release into the synapse. Once released, the vesicle membrane must be reformed again. This happens with the help of a clathrin net. The net lays over the flattened vesicular membrane and pulls it back up into the cell. Once back in the cell, the clathrin detaches and the vesicle is refilled with neurotransmitter molecules again. The presynaptic membrane is where the transporters are for the reuptake system if the neurotransmitter uses one. The neurotransmitter must cross the synaptic cleft or gap to get to the other side where the receptors are. The gap is about 20 nanometers in distance, or 21 billionths of a meter. To move across, the neurotransmitter must avoid degradative enzymes in the transporter of the reuptake system. Once it reaches the other side, the neurotransmitter must connect with the receptors on the postsynaptic membrane. The neurotransmitter does not attach firmly to the receptor, but rather loosely, and can uncouple and reattach to another receptor, thus turning on several receptors before being disabled. The postsynaptic membrane has the receptors embedded in the membrane for the neurotransmitter. These receptors can be ion channels or metabotropic receptors. Once the signal reaches the postsynaptic membrane, it converts back into an electrical signal by depolarizing or hyperpolarizing the membrane. If the membrane depolarizes locally, the signal is called an excitatory postsynaptic potential, or EPSP. If the membrane hyperpolarizes locally, the signal is called an inhibitory postsynaptic potential, or an IPSP. The soma adds up all the incoming EPSPs and IPSPs to determine if threshold is reached. If threshold is reached, the postsynaptic cell will send off its signal. There are also synapses that are electrical in nature, without converting to a chemical signal. Here, connexons line up between the presynaptic membrane and the postsynaptic membrane, allowing the ions to pass straight through, again producing an EPSP or IPSP in the receiving neuron. This ends the video on synaptic anatomy.